Who's manning the place should be?
The next presentation about privacy and tracking protection in Firefox.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Reagan McDonald. I'm Senior Green Policy Manager at Mozilla. This is my colleague François. He is a security and privacy engineer at Mozilla. Today we're going to do sort of a tech policy talk to talk a little bit about privacy and surveillance online and tracking protection, which is a new feature that Mozilla built for the recent release of Firefox 42. When you're in private browsing mode, tracking protection is enabled, which blocks third-party trackers by default. So I'm going to start us off, if this works. So here's just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about. Talk a little bit about the state of online surveillance, how tracking protection works, how widespread it is, not tracking protection unfortunately, but online tracking, and what we can do about it, how we can protect our privacy, and then we hope to have some time for questions and discussion. So, state of online surveillance. Basically, it's no longer really a secret. It's pretty well known that we are under almost constant surveillance, whether we're being tracked or surveilled in some way. Bruce Schneier is a security guru from Canada who has talked a lot about the public-private surveillance partnership. Now, this is basically to explain the relationship and the role that companies play in assisting and working within the surveillance ecosystem of governments. Previously, before the Snowden revelations, it was very difficult to connect what is essentially corporate surveillance to the dangers of government surveillance. And Bruce does this very well. And basically, it works like this. In most people in Europe, we are in a democracy. So the government has certain checks and balances, which means they are not allowed technically to require full surveillance over all of your activities. If the government, for instance, requested that there was a law requiring all citizens to wear tracking devices at all times, that wouldn't work. And yet, we all have mobile phones, probably right next to our kids. If the government requested that we inform them every time we make a friend, every time we have a new colleague, every time we make a new job, that would probably also not work very well in a democracy. And yet we give that information away on social networks like Facebook. If the government was asking for a comprehensive record of all of our communications, every time we called someone on the phone, every time we sent them a letter or an email, that would also be a little bit disproportionate. And yet we do that every single day when we use these big services, any mail-based provider like Google or Microsoft. And so there is an important kind of role that happens in the relationship between the corporation and governments. And it's very important to understand this kind of relationship in order to think about how to reform surveillance and get some privacy back. So basically, I want to talk about the business model of surveillance, but this is different from the business of surveillance. The business of surveillance is a bunch of companies you may know, may not know, mostly Western, from Europe, selling surveillance technologies to different countries. This is a different issue, and if you want more information on that, I would recommend you go to this site from Privacy International. What I want to talk about is surveillance as the business model of the internet. That all of these companies basically collect information, and it creates a big risk for individuals. And the NSA and intelligence services are increasingly relying upon this mass collection and storage and analysis of our data, which puts our privacy at great risk. And it's not only these services that we know, Google and Yahoo and online services, but also telcos. And so the amount of information that can be collected, the real-time access that's available on your location, your communications, your text messages, and on top of that, we've seen in the past few years that telcos have also gotten into the advertising industry as well. So there was a few examples in the US, Verizon, and there was a recent example in the UK, who was working with BT, was working with Deep Packet Inspection company called Form, where they place trackers to monitor all of your activities in order to be able to serve up ads to you. So this is a very, very lucrative industry. The other type of corporate surveillance is a lot of companies that we don't really know. So these are data brokers, such as Rapleaf and Axiom, that basically surveil the internet and suck up all of the information, all of the data dust that you leave. And they also create profiles in order to sell them to interested parties in order to serve you up ads. And this is a very, very lucrative industry. So you can see that some companies are doing better than others. But the recent statistics from 2013 is $117.6 billion industry. So this is a lot of money, which means that when you have a situation when a government or government wants to, for instance, protect privacy or reform data protection laws, you can understand, at least from a policy and legal perspective, this is very difficult because there is a whole lot of pressure and there are a lot of interests involved that are making a lot of money. And so this is basically what Bouchard talks about in this public-private relationship. And what he was talking was really like the U.S. It's more appropriate to the U.S. context, where they don't have baseline privacy laws, but it still does apply in general to the business model of the internet, where the government is less incentivized to reform privacy laws, to rein in some practices around collection and analysis, because they have become dependent and addicted, actually, to the information that is available to them. And they get at this information from a variety of ways. That's my favorite slide from the Snowden revelations, of like when the NSA figured out how to get into Google's cloud, basically, by when the one part in the middle there where the smiley face is, where the SSL is broken. So basically, it's not to attack any type of company or interest, but just to understand that these two issues work together. The companies, there's a number of different ways that governments are seeking this information, and this slide is great because it demonstrates that it can be through legal means, sometimes through national security letters, sometimes they can ask for it nicely, sometimes there's a legal process, or sometimes they just hack directly into it. So the whole point is that the fact that there is so much information, that just creates risk in itself. And so any reform that we do has to take these two issues into account. So the collection is also very important. And so here's an example of, I've been working on privacy in Brussels for many years, and specifically on the data protection regulation, which is a new law that just came into effect. And it was very difficult before the Snowden disclosures to be able to tell people about this relationship, because it made me and other privacy advocates seem like a tinfoil hat person, which is like, oh, Google cookies, like this could be a big risk to you. It's not just annoying ads, but there's an incredible risk to your privacy and surveillance, particularly in the long term. And so this was one of the stories that came out where the NSA had been using Google cookies to pinpoint individuals for hacking. And so this is a great example of how these two can be related or interrelated. So I'm going to hand it over to François now to talk about tracking in practice.
Right, so how do companies actually track you online? The answer is that in the majority of cases, they use a delicious feature that is baked into the HTTP protocol. And of course, I'm talking about cookies. So cookies are pretty simple. They work like this. If you go to a shopping site, you want to be logged in next time you come to that site. What that site is going to do is that it's going to drop a cookie in your browser. Right? A delicious cookie that your browser saves and keeps for a long time. Now, a cookie is just a name and a value. So here, for example, we can tell that this shopping site probably has us as customer ID number 112 in their own database. And so that's what the cookie contains in this example. Now, next time you visit that site, the browser will automatically send a cookie along with every request to that server, because the cookie is tied to the URL of that shopping site. This is great. This is not so great. Third-party cookies are the slightly less tasty version of cookies. And the way that they work is that typically a shopping site will not just be the site itself, but it will also include some external content. For example, it might include a tracking script. And that tracking script will be loaded, the load will be triggered by the shopping site, but then your browser will actually go and fetch the script and then execute it. And because it goes and fetches a script from the tracker gets to set its own cookie as well, right? So you'll have the shopping cookie that you had before, plus a new cookie. Now that cookie will have a different ID, right? Because it refers to a different ID in a different database. And so when you go and visit your shopping site, again, you're still logged in because you presented the right cookie. But then when you load the tracker, you send along the cookie that you got from that domain as well. All of this happens automatically. But what about when you go to a different site? Say you go to your bank, and your bank happens to use the same tracker. Well, in that case, the bank is not going to get a cookie because it's the first visit and they never set a cookie before. But the tracker will get the same cookie that is set previously because it's still the same. That tracker is still at the same URL, and your browser has a cookie for it. Right? So what happens here is that the tracker knows that this person, number 319, has visited both of these sites. Right? The tracker can link those two things together. Something that the bank or the shopping site, they cannot do this because according to their own databases, will be a different customer. Here's an example of a tracker that's very, very popular, Google Analytics. In fact, it is so popular that it is loaded by 2/3 of the top 1 million sites on the internet. Now, if you think about this for a second, it means that when you browse the web, 2/3 of the time, you're loading Google Analytics. 2/3 of the time, Google Analytics can see which sites you're visiting. It's pretty crazy. If you want to disable third-party cookies, it's kind of hidden in Firefox, but here's a way to find it. You just go into privacy, and then the key is to use custom settings for history. I don't know why, but then you get the option for third-party cookies. So you can turn that off. And then you don't have this cookie sent to third-party resources. But they have something else they can do to track you. And that is if they convince sites to load JavaScript directly from them, right, as opposed to just like a tracking image or something like that, then the site can actually pull in some code that will be executed on the site itself. So on the shopping site, you'll have some code that runs from, say, Google Analytics. And then they can do all of these things, right? They can't set a cookie with an ID to recognize you, but they can look at your browser version, your operating system, your time zone, language, the size of your screen, all that stuff. And then if you look at each of these things individually, none of them are unique, right? You may be in the UK time zone, there's lots of other people in the UK time zone. You may be running Firefox on Linux, but there's other users of Firefox on Linux. But if you combine every single one of these and you take the intersection of all of them, then it's starting to be pretty unique, right? Because you may be the only, Firefox for Linux user in the UK that speaks Swahili with a screen size that's small and with this weird font that they've never seen before. So this technique. So this is basically to recreate a unique identifier for you on the fly, and this is called fingerprinting. If you want to know more about this, there's a really great research project from the EFF called Panopticlick, and you can also go to that URL and have your browser test it. So we'll test your browser and it will tell you, oh, you're actually unique of all the browsers we've tested, or you have a very common browser, something like that. So it's actually pretty neat. Now, how widespread is this tracking, right? I've just showed you that it's really easy to do. Now, how widespread is it? The answer to that is it is very widespread. But you can find out for yourself using this browser extension, Lightning. And what Lightning does is that it shows you, when you load a web page, all of the other third parties that are involved in rendering that web page. So, for example, here, if we load a web, the this news site from the UK. We can see in Lightbeam that the Telegraph is in the middle. That's the page we loaded, right? And then all the triangles around are third parties. You can see at the top there's 70 different third parties that are involved in loading one page. Now I did not click on a single article, that's just the home page. 70 different third parties. Not all of these are trackers, probably just the majority, but you know, there might be some content delivery networks for images, videos, whatever, and a ton of trackers. Okay, well, let's take another example. Germany, right? Like, everybody knows that Germans are all about privacy. They're not going to do something like that. That would be crazy. Well, actually, that's pretty much the same, right? Like, they're doing the same. They're probably using most of the same trackers anyways. But, okay, what about Belgium? Right? See that the European Union government and stuff where the privacy law is coming from. Still the same, 74 third parties, again, just loading one page. Right, what about France, right? Is it going to be different? Slightly, 92, they're doing a little bit worse than the others. But, you know, it's still kind of the same ballpark, lots of trackers. Now, the interesting thing is if you look at all four of these websites, we get 209 third parties, right? And we have loaded 4 pages. 209 third parties have been involved in these loads. It's pretty crazy. Look at the middle there. Those are the people that are available, that are loaded by more than one of these sites, right? So if 209 in total, 26 that can see you on more than one page. Okay, so what can we do about it? Right? The simple answer is that we have to say no to trackers. There's no way around it. This has to stop. It's not acceptable. And there are a couple of things we can do, but what we have to do is basically split into 2 categories. The kind of political means and also technical means. And Megan's going to talk about political stuff.
Right, and so this was kind of some of the thinking behind why we wanted to do this talk, because there is a sort of tech element that's like, you know, tracking is pervasive, what are we going to do? Let's build something cool. And that's basically what Mozilla wanted to do, is to try to ameliorate the situation by creating tracking protection. Individually, of course, there's a bunch of other tools and ways that you can protect yourself online. But then there's this third dimension that in the tech community is often seen as maybe not the best solution. And that's the legal way. And so in the EU, actually just very recently, there is a new privacy law that will be passed. It's called the General Data Protection Regulation. And this is intended to reform a law that was passed in 1995, when only 1% of Europeans had access to the internet. So you can see that it's pretty outdated. And the law hasn't yet adapted to the challenges that we're facing today, like with third-party trackers, for instance. And so this was a huge challenge to get through, this law. I won't go into it, but I just wanted to show you one interesting article that actually relates to this discussion. And so it kind of relates to what Mozilla is doing already, which is not really an industry practice, but it could become that. So it's not all completely lost. From the government perspective, things can be improving, and this is one thing. One interesting point about this, though, is that if anyone can read this and understand what it is supposed to actually mean, that would be very helpful, because this does sound like a really potentially privacy protective measure where a data subject can exercise his or her right to objective data processing by automated means using technical specifications. That basically is what François just explained, what we have in our settings in Firefox. That's what that can mean. And that becomes legally binding, and that becomes an obligation on companies to do that. But what exactly does that mean? Is that by checking another box? Is that by making it an option? Is that by making it default? And so I think something to think about when we're passing laws, especially around technology, it's important to engage the tech community. So it's not just policy and legal experts that don't necessarily understand how these issues can be applied. So I think that was something that we could have done better. Well, not me, but I mean, as a community, the legal community can certainly do better to communicate more with the tech community. And so this is something that sounds good. We'll see, and we're looking forward to see in terms of the guidance and the guidelines from the European Commission and others on how Mozilla and other companies might put this into practice. So that's just one important thing. And also I was going to talk about technical means.
Right, so in terms of technical means, the basic idea here is that we want to block network requests. Right? We want to stop talking to these trackers, and we want our browsers to never even connect to them. Because if we can do that, then that means they're not going to be able to set any cookies, right? Because cookies are sent along with the page that they would send us, or the resource that they would send us. Can't fingerprint you, because they don't even get the opportunity to run JavaScript code in your browser. You're blocking them. And they can't see you in the logs, because you're never connecting to them in the first place. So that's great. It turns out we have something like that in Firefox already. We have something that blocks network requests, and it's called safe browsing. It's basically this thing that protects you against sites that host malware or phishing sites. And in fact, you may have seen it already. If you went to that page looking for information about the beer event, and then you clicked on the Delirium Cafe website, instead of seeing this, you would have seen a safe browsing error page. Because as it turns out, the Delirium Cafe website was, and still is as of a couple of days ago in our last check, hosting malware. They've probably compromised, and it's not a safe site to visit. So yeah, just go there, drink, but don't visit the website. Now, we decided to reuse this technology. So safe browsing protects you against malware, phishing sites, that kind of stuff. We decided why not extend that to trackers, right? Why not block trackers at the same time? And that's what we did in Firefox 42 in private browsing mode. The idea here is that when you switch to private browsing mode, you're making it explicit that you don't want to be tracked, that you don't want your history to be kept, all that stuff. And up until Firefox 42, we kind of failed at protecting you against trackers, right? We weren't doing anything special. We were just clearing your history at the end, and that kind of stuff. But now we are blocking trackers by default in that mode. And the way that it works is that we take a list that's maintained by a privacy company called Disconnect. That list is GPL, so if you want to use it for other purposes, that's totally fine. And then we convert it to the safe browsing format, which is very specific. And then we serve it to all Firefox users ourselves. So every Firefox browser grabs the list from Mozilla and any updates. Once, like if there are any updates, they'll get them within an hour. If you want to know how that works, like the technical details, you can read my blog post about it, or you can ask questions later. But one of the interesting distinctions that we have to make is that we're blocking third-party trackers. We're not blocking first-party tracking. And the reason we're doing that is that if you visit, say, a news site, there's an argument to be made that you're implicitly okay with them tracking the fact that you're reading this article, you're reading this other article, they may use that to build recommendation things or whatever. But it's quite a stretch to say that you've implicitly consented to sharing all your personal details with the 92 different third parties that you don't even know. So we block all the third parties, but we don't block the first party tracking. So if you take an example like this, Google.com, Google Analytics, this is technically two completely unrelated URLs, right? So they would be treated as third parties, but they're actually owned by the same company. So we have an internal list in Firefox of domains that are grouped together in order to allow something like this. So you're on Google search on Google search, and they load Google Analytics. That's allowed because it's a first-party relationship between the two. On the other hand, if you're on a completely unrelated site, like say CNN, and you load Google Analytics, that's blocked because that's a third-party tracker. And so as a web developer, what you want to make sure is that you don't have a hard dependency on trackers, like Google Analytics, for example. Because if you do, your site might break when your users don't want to load that tracker. And we have documentation on MDN about how to use Google Analytics properly, if you must. use Google Analytics, and then in a way that's not your site's not going to break, and will respect user choice, people that want to opt out. But what about when you're outside of private browsing? Right? When you're inside private browsing, that's cool, you're protected. What about outside of private browsing? Well, historically, people have used a variety of add-ons. Those ones are really good. I've used them both, NoScript and Privacy Badger, and they work all the time. So they work in normal browsing, private browsing, doesn't matter. But you can also use something that's a little bit hidden in Firefox. You go to About Config, you can turn on tracking protection everywhere. Now we're still working on that feature, that's why it's not exposed in the UI yet. But it works, and it's basically the same feature as in private browsing. So if you want to have it on all the time and be protected in all of your browsing, and you don't want to install any add-ons, you can just do that, and it should work just fine. Something else you can do is you can tweak your cookie settings. There are a couple of settings in Firefox that we allow people to customize, but we don't yet expose because they're kind of a little bit more complicated, and we're not quite sure how to expose them properly. We have to do some more UX work there, but I wrote a blog post about some of the most interesting ones that you might want to customize. And finally, one note about the Tor browser. If you are a journalist and you're doing really important work, or if you're an activist and you're doing work that the government doesn't agree with, you have any other reason to believe that if you're not anonymous online, your life may be in danger or whatever, you should not use Firefox. You should use the Tor browser. That's what the Tor browser is made for. Firefox and Tor both have to make a choice in terms of where they stand in the kind of usability to security privacy trade-off. In Firefox, we have to err on the side of usability, because if we break the web, our users will just leave. The Tor browser has to make sure that the users don't end up in jail or killed, right? So they make a different trade-off and should use Tor. That's awesome. If you want to help, you can report missing trackers that you find on the web to disconnect the company that maintains the list. And you can also reach out to broken sites if you want to help them make their sites more robust and work on tracking protection as well. And if you have any questions, we're happy to take them. Yes. Yes, you. You can yell at me.
On the side, I've been working at eBay and has been working for a time, and noticed that both companies have different.
Can you speak about the router?
I worked at eBay at the time.
eBay, yeah.
They both had problems with referrer headers. In eBay's case, they own Gumtree, and with Gumtree, the referrer head sends this reset password URL to all of the ad tracking networks. Because they're using ad tracking on using tracking sites on their recent password network. They fixed the issue. Then the subsequent thing Uber, Daily Mail, the company called Zopa, which is investment for users, they all do the same thing. And it seems like the browsers are designed to be insecure by revealing the URLs as referrer headers to all of these third parties. I think that should be a priority alongside this work, to try and remove the referrer header.
Yeah, so the comment was there is something else on the web that's a bit of a problem for privacy, and it's the referrer header. For those who don't know, the referrer header is a thing that gets sent along with every request. So when you click a link, for example, and you go to a different site, that site will get the URL of the site where you were before. There are some exceptions, like if you go from an HTTPS site to an HTTP site, they're not going to see anything, but in general, they see the full URL of where you came from. Same thing if you load images across a different domain, they will get the URL where you come from. And the comment was that we should fix this. This is a big privacy leak, and I agree. It's on our to-do list. We can't just remove it because that breaks a whole lot of stuff. But there's work. There are a few ideas about what we can do to mitigate that. And there's a new specification that allows web developers to tighten it on their website. But excellent comments. So next one. So the question was the referrer header, is it sent between HTTPS site to another HTTPS site? Yes. It's also sent between HTTP and HTTP. It's just not sent between HTTPS and HTTP.
There were two other questions earlier. There was a gentleman there and here. So, yes?
Yeah, the tracking protection doesn't just work on a URI level. So if you would do a DNS trick with CNAMEs or other stuff, would that break this thing? Or?
So the question was, is it just based on URI, or if you like create an alias for like a domain that's on our list, is it going to work? Currently, it's just a URI blacklist. It's just like safe browsing. If you create like an alias in DNS for that resource, or you just create another entry with another A record for the same thing, then it will just go through. But we can update the list. So, feel free to do that if you're a tracker. It's an arms race, and it's just one of the tools that we have in our tool chain. Did you want to comment on this? Yeah, so GCP's comment was that, if you Google Analytics, for example, just to pick on them because they're the biggest one, right? They could say that it's they could rename to Google Super Analytics, right? And then we would not block that directly. But the thing is, then they need to get all of the sites to point to Google Super Analytics instead. And so, it's going to be a pain to transition to another domain, and then we'll just add it to the list too. So the question was, for web developers, we need analytics to know which pages are popular or what things what users are doing, that kind of stuff. What are suggestions? So there's an open source solution that's great called pwik. You can install it, you can run it on your own system. If you do that, it's first party tracking. We're not interested in blocking that, right? So that's the best solution, really. The other thing is you don't need analytics about all of your users, right? So users in Firefox are in private browsing, that's not that's not even half the users, right? It's a small percentage. So you're gonna still get quite a few of those. And even if you go further, like that article in the end suggests that if people have do not track, that you not load your analytics for them, that's still less than half. So you can get lots of analytics even if you respect people's desire for more privacy. But if you want to run your own,
Are you going to take this or present it? You want to the thing? You want to the thing? My name is Igor.
Users ask the browser to just delete cookies once the browser is closed, and the Firefox never does it. And there's a debate on it, and I think it's important to ask. And second, a comment. You said that.
So just to reply to that, send me the bug number and I'll have a look.
So it's.
Well, I'm not going to write it down. Email me, François Mozilla.
And the second part is that you said when the user visits the website, there's a kind of implicit consent. There's no such thing as an implicit consent. The European law says there must be an explicit consent. That's why we have these publics now that say, we are going to do scrutiny. Do you want to keep it on
Sure. So the comment was there's no implicit consent in the EU about cookies and tracking. That's why there's the really obnoxious cookie banners on every European website. Any other questions? there's an extension to Firefox that allows you to control what referrer that gets sent to which sites. Yes, there's also like a whole bunch of settings that we don't expose that are really cool. Like there's one, for example, that allows you to lie about the referrer all the time. You just go to a website and it said, like you go to like google.com, it says like, oh yeah, I came from google.com. And then you go to a different website, and it's like, yeah, it came from, like you click a link on Google, you go to Facebook, Facebook's going to get like, yeah, this person just came from Facebook. So like basically it's completely hiding the referrer, but it's not, but it's pretending that it's not stripping it kind of thing. So that works in some cases. There's other things where you can say like, when you go from, if you stay within one website, you don't lie about it because it's kind of useful for the site to know like how people navigate on the sites. But if you cross to a different origin, if you cross to a different site, then you strip it, or you just remove everything except the name of the server that you visited. So there's quite a few ways to customize it, but yeah, we should really make it better.
I wanted to ask you about the difference between privacy badger and secure browsing and Firefox that you have now.
So the difference, what's the difference between privacy badger and tracking protection in Firefox? The main difference is that privacy badger starts with an empty list, and it uses heuristics to actually detect trackers and block them. Now, in Firefox, the tracking protection, we have a list of sites, and we just blocked it immediately. So if a site is not on the list with tracking protection, it's not going to get blocked. With Privacy Badger, it might get blocked if Privacy Badger detects that it's a tracker. Now the problem is when you have an approach like this, it's a little bit more prone to sites breaking, because if you detect it wrongly and you block it, it may, you may disable important parts of the site when you do that. When you have a manually curated list, then it's a little bit more resilient to these kinds of things. So there are trade-offs. You can use both, that's totally fine. Like if you use both, Privacy Badger will start, and then anything that it lets through will get run automatically through tracking protection in case it forgot one or something like that. So feel free to use both. But they have different approaches. Like if you were to use something like Ghost Tree, that's a proprietary add-on, but they are a blacklist-based add-on, just like tracking protection. So they have the same approach in tracking protection.
Back there.
In several European countries, it's now compulsory for websites to show that they're actually tracking via cookies. You need to accept cookies in order to visit that website. Does this refer to first-party cookies, third-party cookies, or there is a lack of legislation that doesn't specify what you're actually accepting by clicking yes?
So that law that you're referring to is the e-privacy directive, or the cookie law. It is going to be reformed actually this year because it has not been faring so well in terms of actual impact. Giving users warnings about cookies and letting them say okay wasn't really the problem they were trying to solve. So I think that whole law will be overhauled and reviewed. In terms of whether it's first or third party, I'm actually not totally sure on that law, but I can look into it. I'm not sure. Yes, you.
How often do we update our tracking protection list, or how often does disconnect update and we update from them, or how does that work?
So whenever disconnect updates the list, they send us a pull request on GitHub, and that's the canonical version of the list for us. Then we have hooks that go into GitHub immediately as soon as something is committed, and generate a new binary list within a few minutes, maybe 2 minutes or something like that. And every Firefox browser polls a server every hour to check if there's a new list or not. If there's no new list, then there's nothing. So in theory, if this network is have a new tracker, so that's a pull request, there's a manual review step, but if we're awake and we approve it, within like an hour and within about an hour, people would have it in Firefox. Safe browsing updates every 30 minutes, but for tracking protection, it doesn't change as often.
Yeah, just quickly, it's first and third party cookies.
Okay, so we are actually saying yes, so we want to be tracked by clicking yes.
Well, it's not an opt-out mechanism, the cookie. It's more of like information for you to consent. So this is basically the heart of the problem, is that one, individuals don't really necessarily know what the trackers are, whether it's first or third. And then two, they don't really have a mechanism whereby they can actually opt out. Because by opting out, what you have to do is essentially close that tab or not use that website, or come back to it by using Tor, and many of those websites don't actually let you use them properly when you use those kinds of secure browsing techniques. So there's a lot of improvement that needs to be done on this front, because it's just been kind of a failure from a user perspective. And so, yeah, in the second quarter of this year, the European Commission will be opening up that law to hopefully improve it. But yeah, and Mozilla will be working on that as well. You had a question?
A huge part of this third parties cookie for tracking can be attributed to the economic model because it's based on advertising, and all that. Mozilla had a lot of research, like the experiments with balancing browsers and probability bias. That was wrapped up since then, and this is obviously a work how to reform this economic model. So it's Mozilla working, like create just heard of a new browser comes up that is trying to do that. Google Mozilla and the one that we are heard of. So it's Mozilla working on like problem still, and doing here one in this case. So just tracking, blocking the tracking, not actually trying to
So the question was, aside from blocking trackers, is Mozilla trying to solve the underlying problem, which is this business model of targeted advertising and how sites are they rely on this to provide free content and that kind of stuff. Yes, it's something that we're interested in. Content services has shut down, but not everything. Like it's not like we just like erase that entire thing from our memories. We've learned a lot while going through these things, and there are some initiatives that we're thinking about right now along this space of trying to help. Basically, we want to make sure that the web survives. That's what we're about, and that involves publishers being able to publish on that. So.
And just to add, finding that sort of healthy balance between what is good for the internet and the user, also something that doesn't completely break the internet. So there is a lot of aspirations, and that's one of the great things about Mozilla is that we have a sort of passion and vision of the kind of internet that we want, and to provide users with choice and transparency and actual control. But we are operating in this environment, and it is the business model of the internet, and we're certainly working towards improving that. And I think tracking protection and these other examples are ways in which we're trying to improve the situation, while still working, for instance, in policy, working here on these long-term solutions for laws, pushing governments to do better things and have more sense in such laws. And then also building tools, and also actually doing education and working with communities, helping people to learn how to use the tools that they can to protect themselves from the situation. Yes.
That's the last question because our time is up.
There's this thing called Cloudflare, and they basically act, as far as I understand, as a man-in-the-middle attack on all of the internet. Because almost every website uses Cloudflare. Is that correct? And a correct assessment, or?
Alright, so the question was, there's this company called Cloudflare, and are they doing a giant man in the middle on the entire internet? Well, I think that the marketing term for that is SSL termination. So, I mean, that's a service that people buy, and yes, they can read data and like the data that people post on there. Depending on what you host there, like if you're hosting a bunch of like animals and videos, then like, it really doesn't matter. I don't know that like Facebook is going to put user data, or Google are going to put user data in services like this. Like, you know, I think it really depends. Like, yes, they have the private keys because they're terminating the SSL. There's a problem that is that a problem? It depends on what people are hosting there. Like in most cases, I suspect it's not really an issue.
I mean, if you browse tutorial, you see